Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Welcome back. I'm reviving the channel after a hiatus of a very difficult time in my life, and I'm doing a very old school YouTube response video. This is a Mutazili response to Tim Winter, radiallahu anhu. I think he's a good guy. Respect him a lot. Regarding Imam Ali, peace be upon him. So let's go through it.
The calamity of this battle is that Zubayr is killed by an individual called Ibn Jarmuz. Now, Ali cites a hadith indicating that the killer of Zubayr will be under a curse. So Ibn Jarmuz, who's perplexed by this kind of internecine dispute, says, if we fight with you, we are in hell. If we fight against you, we are in hell. ثم بعج بطنه بسيفه فقتل نفسه, and then he stabbed himself and killed himself. This is the kind of trauma that's now taking place. But of course, there's no possibility of vengeance. Ali sends Aisha radiallahu anha mukarramatan, in a noble way, back to Medina, and he sends some women of Iraq with her. So that's the.
So this is a great way to set the table. So I'm going to do a quick fact check on the Hadith citation about the killer of Zubair being cursed. It seems to me like Zubair was inciting a rebellion and against the appointed, whatever you want to call it, the Imam, the Khalifa, whatever the framework, the guy who's inherited the authority of the and his messenger parts of the Quran. And he's making war against Allah and his messenger by doing so. So I don't, and the Quran says you got to deal with those people through execution, basically. So I don't quite get that. So I'm going to investigate that real quick. Aisha being forgiven is great. It is said that Ali took out the Zulkufar, his iconic double-pointed sword, and inside the scabbard was a scroll, and the scroll contains the so-called Constitution of Medina, which is really a bit of an anachronism. A better way to think of it as a treaty that allowed Medina to exist as a pluralistic polity rather than like a nation, a city-state constitution that is legalistically pluralistic in the way the U.S. Constitution, for example, is. But okay, not to split hairs. I do like to split hairs. I think it's academically important, but okay, very important sort of companion as a presumably real historical document to the Quran as an example of as an artifact of the real Sunnah of peacemaking, which is also Quranic. So it's not like it's bringing something new. Rather, it's an implementation of our interpretation of Quranic principles, are being, sort of mutazili, like the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution is more Quranic than a lot of Islamic polities were throughout the centuries, this kind of perspective. So that's a very nice addenda I want to make to this story. It's not so much like Aisha is the mother of the believers, and so she can like do a rebellion and just it's like, but we love all the Sahabi and we forgive them. Aisha did a very bad thing, and she needed to make sincere tawbah for it in order to enter paradise. She doesn't get, a get out of hell free card doing major sins that kill lots of people. Um, Politically, it was an affordable move. She was the figurehead of the rebellion. Um, and Ali was right to forgive her, even though there was a small chance that she could become dangerous later on. And the main thing here is that we should like we'll get into it. The whole Sunni, don't talk about the Sahabi thing. We'll get into it later in the video. I'm gonna go fact check this hadith about the killer of Zubair real quick. One second. All right, so my judgment after looking into this with Sheikh Hippolyte here is I'll open on you is that yeah, like it is plausible that Ali would have said something like that. He may have framed it in the Al-Tirmidhi hadith framing because Zubair was the son of the Prophet's aunt. He was a cousin, in other words, just like Ali. And there may have been, maybe there was something that was said about like, don't kill this guy, with the assumption that he would be overall a good boy. Now, he did commit a major sin by going against Ali. This is true in Sunni and Shia perspectives. The Zaydi perspective, which is closer to the Mutaza perspective, would take it as, we reserve judgment kind of approach. And then as far as his killer goes, as long as he had clearly withdrawn from the fight, and the more time between Zubair's death and the beginning of the battle and his withdrawal, the worse it looks for Ibn Jarmuz. And therefore, he would be applying a hard punishment incorrectly, which would be like a sort of a shirk and a killing a mu'min and a major sin in his own respect. And so there is some plausibility to this. The more explicit hadiths are in like Musnad Ahmad and don't really check out. But yeah, we're going to give this one a thumbs up. All right, let's keep going.
At the Battle of the Camel. And then the issue of Muawiyah, his equal. قال لا. He said, certainly not. إني لأعلم أنه أفضل مني. I know that Ali is better than me. وأحق بالأمر مني. And has more right to authority than I. ولكن ألستم تعلمون أن عثمان قتل مظلوما وأني ابن عمه. But don't you know that Uthman was killed unjustly and that I am his cousin? So go to him and ask him to find and hand over the killers. And then the militia of Muawiyah and Ali's army meet at Safin between Iraq, Syria. There are indecisive skirmishes, and then Muawiyah proposes the arbitration to prevent further.
Right, so we're getting up to the Khawarij setup. So good old Muawiyah, the Kaiser Soze of Islam. So this is the crux of the problem with this whole Sunni perspective and trying to put a linchpin in it by trying to attribute to Ali a softer version, which is what this video is about, of what like the Musnad Zayd, which is a total fabrication, tries to do to Ali. In that case, he's trying to make him out to be al-Shafi. But in this case, he's just trying to make him out to be kind of this Imam Ali, fourth of the Rashidun, actually was everyone's friend. Why are these like Shia so hung up? They're not doing what Ali would like, kind of apologetic, which is of course his prerogative as a Sunni scholar, to postulate and articulate the Sunni position. Um, Based on things that I've talked with Khalid, from Chronic Islam channel, from the explorations and scholarship of Sheikh Ibn Maliki, who is still languishing in Saudi prison. May Allah preserve him and free him. And he's still a rather young man. I don't think he's even 60 yet. He's young by spending your life in prison standards. He's been in prison for like 7 or 8 years now. It's very bad. So anyway, you can see why he would be in prison, because he's the guy who digs up these tidbits like Muawiyah taking the minbar and trying to give a khutbah right after Umar's death, which is suspicious timing. It looks like maybe he was connected to Umar's death. And the more factually, I mean, that I suppose that is a factual reportage, which looks bad, but it's circumstantial evidence. It doesn't mean Muawiyah necessarily put out the hit on Umar, but it makes you wonder. And then Uthman's death, things got riled up from a letter sent by Marwan, who was Muawiyah's cousin. So this is the like Umayyad infiltration, and they're using Uthman, who is an Umayyad, and then everyone hated him because of his nepotism. It was just the beginning. It was a portent. Actually, Uthman was like kind of a good faith nepotist. He was like, what's the problem, guys? It's just my cousin. I gave him Egypt." Um, and he was like surprised that people were mad at him and wanted to kill him. But no such surprise would be expected from Muawiyah. So that looks more like the whole, "oh, we demand justice for Uthman" thing was really part of the plan of the Umayyad conspiracy. Sacrifice one of their own and then use his death as the grievance to justify their coup, their civil war, their attempt to seize power. That's that would be the Shia position, and I would say a neo-Mutazili position incorporating the scholarship of the Sheikh Ibn Maliki. So anyway, just to contrast, let's keep going.
The bloodshed, and all agree. And this is the beginning of the Kharijite episode, which is another of the headaches that Sayyidina Ali has in Kufa, and is in love with a Kharijite woman called Qutam, who all of the historians describe as one of those most beautiful women of her age. He proposes marriage to her, but she says, لا أتزوج بك إلا على 3,000 وعبد وقينة وقتل علي ibn Abi Talib. I will only marry you in exchange for these things. Firstly, I want 3,000 silver coins. I want a male and a female slave, and I want you to kill Ali ibn Abi Talib. She's a Kharijiyya. She's one of these extremist assassins. So, in order to win her, he poisons his sword and enters the mosque of Kufa. Ali at that time is calling the people to the prayer, and Ibn Muljam steals up behind him and brings the sword down on him with an enormous blow. He drops his sword, people grab him, and Ali is taken back to his house. He dies shortly afterwards, and Ibn Muljam is sentenced and executed. And that's the end of the mortal life of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib. And alhamdulillah, he's not killed by anybody from a reputable group or sect of the Muslims. Is killed by one of these wild Kharijite, as it were, Al-Qaeda type assassins, absolutists, a kind of suicide bombing mission. It has nothing to do with any of the mainstream Muslims. None of the Sahaba or the Tabi'een are in favour of this, but still, it's a traumatic event and a catastrophe. But still, Islam, the mill of Islam, goes round and continues, and things do not fall apart, despite the fact that, perhaps inevitably, when you consider the enormous ambition of the project of early Islam, the creation of a new civilization almost overnight, the emergence of a new and pure monotheism, very different to what people had known before, the emergence of a new economic system, the emergence of a social model that wasn't really based on hierarchy and aristocracy, the birth really of a new spiritual type, with variations, and each of the four caliphate represent variations on that spiritual type. The size of the empire, what's being done is gigantically ambitious, and in a sense it's kind of inevitable that there will be tensions, and it's miraculous that the tensions were no greater than they actually were, because ultimately the Ummah did hold together, alhamdulillah.
Okay, so I love the optimism and the positivity, and I appreciate and broadly agree with the overall thrust of his speech, of his khutbah here, which is that we ought to not be like backbiting people, right? However, once people are dead and their deeds are sealed, I think it's open for discussion, so we can draw real moral conclusions and project forward. So, just 2 points about that. Um, Islam became very sectarian. So we'll get into the Wajama hadith later in this video. And so I don't know, but so you can then say, no, this is the Ummah, this is this 68% or what have you. And the Ummah was not divided. Okay, great. By just redefining it. It's like the Ijma definition of like takfir. You say, well, they're against Ijma, they're not a Muslim. Oh, but they pray 5 times a day and they just have this dissenting opinion. No, 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 that dissenting opinion is kufr, therefore they're not a Muslim. They're outside of Ijma and becomes circular. Okay, fine. This is standard post Risala usul for Sunnism. Um, and then the point about there's no aristocracy, we're doing this whole taqwa-based moral social order. It's really not true. In fact, the ascendance of Muawiyah, if anything, cemented the classism, and then things like making kufr on 425 so you can abuse women, and then the benefits of being wealthy are you can have a moral license to do all kinds of horrible stuff. um and there are obviously a lot of people who critique Islam for this, so rather than do apologetic and be like, no, actually it was always great, I'm like going to say, actually this was a point where this promise of Islamic civilizational reboot began to become severely and semi-permanently corrupted, unfortunately.
But there's something tragic about this, and something about the whole spiritual fragrance of Imam Ali that is helpful in reminding us that things in this world often don't work the way that we'd like them to. People don't always live happily ever after. Sometimes there is tragedy. People die. There are relationships don't work. This is
Right. So this is where I strongly agree. The biography of Imam Ali from this more rationalistic Shia light perspective, right? So I take the perspective that the classical Mutazili were a somewhat corrupted derivation of Hassani Shiism through Ali's grandson, Muhammad al-Hanafiya, and his son then taught Wasil ibn Ata, and there's an ijaza there. So the Mutaziliya is really fundamentally Shia phenomenon, and it gives us something closer to the Zaydi Usul, and there's a lot of overlap there. But with a more Hadith critical and Quran centric and rational or reason of primacy type fiqh, and therefore the main value of Ali is not that he's God incarnate, like a Hulati perspective, or that he's the father of this lineage of 12 Imams, or however many Imams, like, with the Imami sects, the Ismailis and the Ithna Ashri. Rather that the Sunnah, as he inherited it, and it's not necessarily that he had to become Khalifa right away. He had the patience for Abu Bakr and Umar, etc. He probably thought they were good enough that it wasn't worth making a fuss over. Obviously, after his wife got seriously injured and possibly fatally, um, he probably had a grievance with that. This is where we get into like hardcore Imami Shia, what they call Rafida, right? Um, but he was able to kind of do the hard thing, which is to be patient and bite his tongue, and and then he was going to become the successor to Umar, but he wouldn't commit to following the Sunnah of Umar. So this idea of Nas was built in, and it was like this is the whole Quranism versus Hadith thing. How can you? What about wati Rasul? And that this is how everyone understood it: is that you can't you need this commander component from the on top of the Quran, and it should be like a living person, was the logical thought that everyone had right after the Prophet's janazah when they appointed the new Khalifa and so on. And it was only really in like, and the Abbasids, even by, the Umayyads kind of tried to do it, and then the Abbasids kind of tried to do it. And we only got this rationalization of like, not, no, never, it's just these hadith, it's just the one guy rather than a lineage, whether by biology or appointment. The proto-Sunni perspective is by appointment or by consensus, by this oligarch smoke-filled room deciding the next guy, and it just didn't work out, right? Um, so it's a clearly the problem of politics and religion was clearly something that got the best of humanity, despite the Quran, and the best efforts of Imam Ali and his sons, who would also be persecuted. But anyway, you know that already. All right, let's keep going.
The nature of dunya, and the later Khulafa did discover this, and hence in our literature and in our culture generally we have this way of venerating and revering flawlessness of the man and the difficulty of his situation and his tragedy. Hanafi madhab and in deen things, but he's also a journalist. He runs the
Don't give me an ad. Come on.
literature.
Okay,
How
good.
much of it actually represents authentically his own khutbahs and his own statements is not clear, but certainly there's a lot of his fragrance about it. But he says something very interesting in the Nahj al-Balagha, in one of his sermons. With regard to me, two groups of people shall be destroyed, namely, he who loves me to excess, so that love takes him away from what is correct, and he who hates me so much that the hatred also takes him away from the truth. The best person with regard to me is he who follows the middle course. So be with him, and be with the great majority of Muslims, because Allah's hand of protection is with the maintenance of unity. You should beware of division, because the one isolated from the group is a prey to shaitan, just as the one isolated from the flock of sheep is a prey to the wolf. Beware. Whoever calls to the course of sectarianism, fight him, even though he may be under this banner of mine. So here, in this great classic,
Right. Okay. So this is a key part. This is, I guess, the second key, Aliism that is being Sunnified in this khutbah that I want to recontextualize. Um, this, first of all, well, maybe this is just a fabrication. We don't know of the Nuhul Balaga, but okay. I, the cool thing about being Mutazili is you don't just stop at that position, like a full Hadith rejection position, or historical revisionism, a historical skepticism, which can go to extremes. So there are Quranists who are like, there are like Aisha mythicists. Like they think all these people are fabricated personae, and we don't even know what happened. It's all post hoc. Well, okay. The Mutazili perspective is that you can investigate and you can presume credence, and you can also consider mutation in the success of, so the Nahul Balaga that we have is, like everything else, it's composed centuries after the fact, right? This is problematic. Um, but this is the ijma thing again, and they're putting it in Ali's mouth in the Nahul Balaga, which I want to give a little more credibility to than things like Musnad Zaid. And he's saying things that actually a lot of Shia, like Imami Shia, would agree with. You shouldn't be, as a Shia, going into a Sunni mosque and shooting everybody like happened one time. I don't think, fortunately, not too often. And then there was like a Shia young man who posted the video because, of course, if you're gonna go killing people and that's your life's work, that you're gonna die in some murder spree, you gotta post a video. Or, it used to be before we had, in my youth, you would write a manifesto and put it on like an Angel Fire website or something, as people could get the TXT file. Um, but yeah, you gotta, Elliot Rodger posting his like thoughts on video. It's just like we've created this media gin that you kind of make a deal with when you do these things. So anyway, so Shia guy did that to a bunch of Sunnis, very sadly. And another Shia guy was posting it, and then all of the like adult Shia people were responding, and they were like, "Brother, you got to delete this. Like, this isn't what we're about." And what I've encountered by and large is that there are rather sectarian Shia guys. The Akbarians are the most. They're like the Salafist of Shia. They're like the Hadith and Al Kafi are the truth kind of people. But I'd say on average, the distribution of sectarian beefing that I've witnessed among Shia on Twitter versus among, never mind Salafists, they're like the lightning rod, but among sort of Rafida condemnation among more mainstream Maliki-ish people, not quite as genteel as our man here in this neo-traditionalism, but they're kind of in that neo-traditionalist sector, and I see them beefing on Shia more. Those people have chilled since the Iran war, and they go, maybe these brothers of ours are actually doing jihad, and maybe the Sunnis should be, making a difference in this world order more, right? And they kind of realize that this isn't where I need to be putting my, even if I don't like, I think they do shirk. I think the whipping thing on Ashura is haram, which is what Shia imams and or Mirzas, their ulema say these days. Anyway, they've moderated a lot against Sunni complaints. When I was in the group chat with Balam, may Allah guide him, and a lot of esoteric Shia, they were like pretty critical of Twelvers for being sort of Sunnified in their not as much as Zaydis, but in their position relatively Sunnified. So anyway, um, so did Imam Ali actually say this? Does it mean the same thing as the prophetic hadith that he's going to get into later about who's not going into the fire, wajama? And then you get into the circular, sort of democratically elected theology based on that as a lever of like, well, now we've got the majority and we voted that this is what Islam means, so this is Islam. This is not Quranic, you know. What is Quranic is to not be sectarian, so that component is correct. And it could be that this is, for the sake of argument, a verbatim thing, and that at the time that it was said, when Imam Ali was ruling the majority of the Muslims, except for the Khawarij rebels and the Damascus region, that it was literally true. But it doesn't mean that he meant it as being true for all time if the majority are following corrupt leaders. So that would be my. I know it's a little bit of an apologetic because you can certainly extrapolate it as literally true for all time because he said it. But also that when you're thinking about Alid Hadith, you don't think of, and actually this is how Shia approach Imami Hadith in general and Al Kafi, is that yeah, I guess you have to believe there's Isma and that every Hadith, if it's true, is like God's truth. And they can just re-rate those Hadith more freely than a Buhari student scholar in the Sunni tradition. But from a Mutazili perspective, this Isma thing is way overblown. Like, yeah, they're more holy people, they're good, they're Uswa Hasana, this whole thing, but nobody's actually perfect. Nobody's free of error. So you actually you have to think about things yourself. And therefore, in this case, what if Ali actually said that verbatim at the time in the 650s in the first century Hijri, and he meant it in that context, it doesn't mean that this is a theological principle in all contexts. So that's my apologetic for that.
The Nahj al-Balaghi is specifically saying, be with the great majority of Muslims. And that's how he was constantly. Because it's all about Islah that al-Bayn. Every one of these painful decisions that he had to take, these tragedies that he was confronting, of the difference of opinion amongst the passionate Ali, and have a positive opinion of everybody. His respect for Aisha, his respect for all of the Sahaba is what we should be following. That's one of the most important things that we should be learning.
But did he really respect all of the Sahaba? Let's take the broad definition. Muawiyah is technically a Sahaba, even though he converted after Meccan conquest. I think a lot of these problems would be solved by just moving that pick to before Mecca and say, if you joined afterwards, yeah, sure, you became a companion in the sense that you went on, the next campaign to go confront the Byzantines and so forth. But you're like a lower tier companion, man. Like, I mean, it's kind of like people who go into paradise from centuries or whatnot in Al Araf because they were forgiven versus people who and they did good deeds and they had some faith and or they went into the fire and they got taken out briefly from the Qudsi Hadith from Ibn Abbas, if that's true. Whatever your like almost damned and then forgiven type situation, eventually you go into Jannah, and that's great. I love that. This is a big part of my understanding of Allah's mercy and justice. But it's like, if you were a Muslim for much of your life, I'm a late convert, so and I'm not a perfect Muslim, but I get up and I do the Fajr, I do the fast, you know what I mean? Like it's a little bit more like, oh, you committed when it was difficult. Like there's a little more credit to that. So anyway, let's move on.
There's an amazing dream of one of the very early hadith scholars, Amr ibn Shurahbil, which always makes me think. This is what he wrote down after he saw the dream. رأيت كأنني دخلت الجنة. I saw it was as though I had entered paradise. فرأيت قبابا مضروبة. And I saw domes or tents that had been set up. فقلت لمن هذه القباب? And I said, who are these tents for? فقالوا لذي الكلاع وحوشب. وكان ممن قاتل مع معاوية. And it was said to me, they are for Dhul Kila and Hawshab. And they were two of the people who had fought and killed on the side of Muawiyah. فقلت فأين عمار وأصحابه? And I said, so where are Ammar and his companions? Ammar bin Yasir, one of the great Sahabas, was killed in that battle, fighting for the cause of Ali. قالوا أمامك. And he said, there, in front of you. قلت وقد قتل بعضهم بعضا. And I said, they were fighting amongst themselves. قيل إنهم لقوا الله ووجدوه واسع المغفرة. And it was said, when they met Allah, they found that He was of broad and great mercy. قلت فما فعل أهل النهر؟ قيل لقوا برحا. And then I said, what about the people of the river? That's the Kharijites, the extremists, the narrow-minded literalists, the people who assassinated Ali. And it was said, they found the fire of hell. And that really sums up the position of the scholars of Islam, that we draw a veil over what might seem sometimes to us to be strange about intentions that seem to be conflicting with each other, and that we say, كلهم عدول, all of them are upright witnesses. And there's a tremendous spiritual wisdom in this.
Right. So obviously the perspective that something went terribly wrong is contrary to what this apologetic is doing. Um, Maybe that was a real dream that had a real marifa, that was a real spiritual revelation, and that Allah forgives people who fight wrongfully based on good faith, sort of, I mean, if you were to judge everybody who's on the wrong side of morally of a war, let's say Russia's on the wrong side and the sort of Christian Ukrainians are on the more correct side. So Allah's gonna like give and then their Christianity is acceptable to Allah in some narrow sense. Okay. And then so they go to heaven and all the Russians don't is like not really very just. It's like you get pulled up out of your village and pressed into the military. It's a tough one, right? Now these guys sound like they were more senior officers, but I like the idea that Allah could do that. It does go against another hadith that when a believer and another believer encounter each other and slay each other in the field of battle, they will both end up in hell. Here's they both end up in heaven. Um, okay. And then obviously we have the Quran, which says that when two believers fight each other, you should like de-escalate and make a peace with it. And it's it doesn't say what that other hadith says. And of course, but the thing with hadith is you have equal and opposite hadith, right? So here's one hadith, which is not a prophetic hadith. It's a bit more of a folklore. It's like a dream some guy had after this traumatic fitna period. And so what are we what are we to make of this? I'd say I'm optimistic about it. It actually, like there are things in Sunnism that are optimistic, if not maybe a bit naive, but I respect the optimism. Um, and then also, the way that the Hawarij successors, who are the more quietist bodies, deal with this whole concept of like the Ijma and the Jama as an arbiter of salvation is first of all, they don't fight people, so they're not getting all these sins on them the way the more aggressive jihadists cousins to their movement were, and that's why they died out, by the way. And then by the way, I love that the guy who killed, I mean, I don't love it, but I find it deeply resonant that the guy who killed Ali did it as a maher for a beautiful woman. Um, just, uh, Allahu Akbar. Yeah, there's something about that. And yeah, so anyway, the way that the Abadis rationalize the hadith without rejecting it is that they consider themselves within the Jama, despite also having had a very exclusionary soteriology where they assume most Sunnis or all Sunnis will go to hell and so on, until recently, until Sultan Quds, I think it was his name, kind of cleaned up the place in Oman and did a great job, as Donald Trump would say. He did a good job, and it's a lot of rationalization. I prefer, well, so that's the next thing. So let's jump ahead to that.
And this is why we find that the way of Imam Ali, karramallahu wajha, becomes the way of futuwa, not just for his own age, but subsequently, and the great spiritual ways of Islam flow from him. All of the tariqas of Islam, with the exception of the Naqshbandiyya, go from Ali ibn Abi Talib. Why should that be? Well, even
Want a quick note that the Naqshbandiyya also traced their silsila to Ali until I think it was about 80 or 90 years ago, and they kind of did this modernist revisionism where they tried to pin it on Abu Bakr. Um, so make of that what you will.
the Naqshbandiyya, their silsila includes Ja'far al-Sadiq, and they also have the kind of alid fragrance about them. So why is that? That requires indications. Why is it that the way followed by Imam al-Ghazali and all of the great ones, Imam al-Junayd, the great saints of Islam, the spiritual fragrance comes from Imam Ali? Well, the reason is that the practice which he shows in his life, which is to draw a veil over people's misunderstandings and to work for the reconciliation and always to follow the majority of the Muslims, is the basis for true spirituality. We have two options when we see things that we don't understand happening.
Okay, that's one interpretation. The slightly different spin is that he did his best to assert a specific justice, and he's the kind of guy who would be great for that. He's the sort of Davidic meets Christ type figure. He was both strong but also self-sacrificing. However, um, he wasn't trying to draw a veil. There's a hadith of Ali alayhi salam, where he says he was trying to induce Muawiyah into revealing his nifaq by betraying the deal. So in order to put that on the record indisputably, first you must make a deal which was actually convenient, saves lives at the time, and you get to go home and eat some baba ganoush. So who doesn't like to not die that day, and maybe we'll die another day, right? Um, but it wasn't that he was trying to reinforce an Abbasid era doctrine of like, don't question the Sahabi, it's not your place kind of a thing. He was trying to rule the whole Ummah. And it was difficult because of powerful Munafiq. And also, you could say the Hawarij, by trying to reject shirk, became mushriks by appointing themselves. And this is the don't put your voice over the prophet thing, right? Um, so I'm more sympathetic to the Hawarij than I am to the people fighting for Muawiyah, because the people fighting for Muawiyah knew that he wasn't anything to the Prophet other than a scribe and a late convert and an ally, a later day ally. But he wasn't appointed by the Prophet, whether at Hadir or through the consensus. So who are you? And if God was willing to forgive them because here I live in Damascus, so I have, like, this is a job, and God's willing to forgive that, like, mashallah. Is God willing to forgive me for going to work for Palantir? Could I cash this in? Like, maybe I can get an offer from Palantir. I have some skills, like perhaps maybe this is halal income. Can I work? Can I make Where's Daddy too? Does this it doesn't check out for me morally, but okay. I like mercy from Allah. Maybe he had mercy for some of the Hawarij too. I don't know. Not the ones who murdered like the farmer family, for example. But maybe some of them. Um, there can be, this is part of justice. You have all these exceptions. And no, like, this is not the fragrance. The fragrance is that you have to struggle for what is right and not become a criminal or self-appointed sort of mushrik extremist judge in the process. And that even if Ali was not with Isma, he doesn't have this magic glow about him where he can do no wrong. He was struggling to do the best that he could with the circumstances, um, since the death of the Prophet. And you could say before, but definitely after. So
between people. Either we can allocate blame, and we can say he killed him and he's on his side and feels superior, and the nafs loves duality, unless you have this principle of giving people the benefit of the doubt and forgiving and including. The moment you start to point the finger of blame and to allocate blame, then the gates of Allah's rahmah are closed to you because of the state that you're in.
So don't be sectarian and assume the worst, but the role of a Qadi is to actually make a distinction and maybe even appoint hudud punishments, or something lighter, some kind of tazir. I'll let you off easy, which is great, which is part of this spiritual fragrance he's talking about. It's the best thing about the Sunni tradition is that a lot of qadis were Ghazali style, which is his sort of manhaj, Sufi, not heavy ascetic Sufis, but they practiced extra zikr and they did nafil salah and so on, and then they go to work and they could execute a guy, but maybe they'll exile him or something, right? So la la la, beautiful. Um, but no, this is not actually true. The gates of Rahman are not closed to you for making a moral judgment against somebody who claims Islam. Okay, like, you, the Quran says, if we had not appointed you to, do jihad against oppressors, then there would be corruption in the land everywhere. And this attitude that he's citing is a denegation of that, to the point where we have Arab Sunni rulers who are basically Zionists of varying degrees of realpolitik commitment. Um, so the UAE being the foremost among that is not really because they're ideologically like, oh yeah, absolutely, they have a right to the land of the West Bank, and God, like, Ben Gvir is our guy. It's not that. It's just that they're cynical. They just think this is the move. Saudi has a somewhat different power basis, so it's not as advantageous, and they have a lot more people, so there's more risk for revolt in Saudi. So it's not as advantageous for them to be as Zionist, and also just from the chess perspective of, like, their relationship to Israel. Technically, they're going to get conquered by Israel in part, according to the Greater Israel thing, right? So no, like, Islam doesn't make any sense if that. It doesn't make nothing makes any sense if that's true. If what he's saying is true, then, like, go be a wealthy Emirati and hire, like, Ukrainian women to abuse, and then go to Umrah and get all your sins forgiven, and just follow Mohammed bin Zayd. Like, what are you talking? Like, bro, come on. Anyway.
So that's a very important lesson for us to learn. And Imam Ali, Karamallahu wajhah, is a great example of that. Dependence upon you. Principle of wilaya The idea of political authority in Islam is to do with ideas such as imara, or imama, or khilafa. The early Muslims, when speaking of government, would say amruna, our affair, our command. Wilaya is a term that is sometimes used in connection, not so much with political authority, although it can be, but that's the less obvious implication. But wilaya means inward authority. It means closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Man tawalat af'aluhu ala muwafaqa. Whoever's actions follow one another in conformity to the sunnah. That is the wali. And in the famous hadith al-Nawafil, which is the most famous hadith of Islam, when adali waliyan faqad adhantuhu bil harb. Whoever harms a wali, a friend, a saint of mine, I declare war on him. Then it goes on to explain what that is. It's somebody who progresses through obligatory acts, through voluntary acts, until they reach the state of love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in the prophetic vocabulary, wilaya, or being wali, is to do with this inward closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we find a number of important hadiths, very important hadiths, which explain the whole subsequent spiritual landscape of the religion, in which this particular type of wilaya is associated with Sayyidina Ali. Of course, wilaya, sainthood, is the way of the Sahaba generally. But the hadith of Ghadir Khum, for instance, is very important, regularly cited by the ulama in this context. It's a sound hadith.
Me too.
That the Holy Prophet takes his hand, radiallahu an, and says, Man kuntu mawlahu fa aliyun mawla. Whoever has me as his mawla, then Ali is his mawla. Mawla is related to wali. In other words, it's to do with spiritual excellence. It's to do with the authority of a spiritual guide. And this is, if we're looking at the particular fragrance or signature tune, as it were, of each of the great Khulafa, this is what Imam Ali has bequeathed, this kind of...
So the people who have, by the way, I skipped, I think, somewhere in here the part about the Wajama hadith, but you've heard it at length. Um, so if you've ever been told that you're a kafir by somebody, like probably a Sunni, for saying, "Oh, I don't follow that hadith. I don't believe in that hadith." Maybe not saying I don't believe in any hadith or I don't believe in the concept of it. I don't think that's the right interpretation of the Quran. That's more of a Quranist perspective. But just being more moderate, and you say, I don't take that hadith. And they go, what do you mean? It's in Sahih Bukhari. You're a kafir, right? Those same people take this hadith, which is way above Sahih from Bukhari, way later. This is mutawatir. Of course, by the time we get to the Hadir, the final khutbah hadith in Muwatta Malik, about 110, 120 years later, we get the mutation of this where it's the Sunnah, and then you have just the Quran version, the Ahl Bayt version. But the condensed bit, just the one line of him appointing Ali as his successor. So the Wati Rasul authority is extending to this specific guy, is what that means. Maula means master. Okay. Now this goes into like Christianity, where Christians will look at like Psalm 110, and in the English translation it'll be the Lord, capital L, said to the Lord, lowercase l. So, and then they say, you must confess that Jesus is Lord, or Christ. They say Christ is King a lot on Twitter, right? And that is actually not necessarily shirk. When the Shia sing Ali Mola, Ali Mola, and they clap, and this is the fun thing about hanging out and praying with the Shia. There's music. It reminds me of being in church a little bit. The um, the implication is not that like it's like to Rab. This is not God. This is somebody who has authority over you in a context, in a temporal context. So this isn't hulat. Ali being your Maula is not that in paradise there's going to be like Ali on the right hand of God, like Jesus, and no, like it's just that he's like in charge of you right now. Okay, simple, right? Nice and clean. Like this guy's your boss. You have this job. He's not God. If he orders you to do a sin, maybe you should risk your job for that, right? But like otherwise, listen to your boss. Like just do the job. Like keep your job. Um, that's what this is. So in the Sunni interpretation, it's it means friend. So Mawla can have different meanings, and friend is like has no connotations of power or authority whatsoever. It's just like, I like Ali, you should too. And this is how Sunniism adapts and honors Imam Ali. by saying like, oh yeah, this guy's like is great, he's a top companion. He's not the top companion. I don't want to like start playing that beauty contest, but he's great. We love Ali, so we're safe. And actually, I think, theologically, I don't take a strong Shia perspective of like you're going to go to hell if you're not an Orthodox, correct sect within Shiism. Um, Simply that the Quran only makes and the history and what we can try to suss out about Hadith only makes sense to me if this is actually about passing on the torch of authority, because it seems like it's baked into the Quran. Whether that's for all time or not is a debate within Shiism. Only the Ismailis, funnily enough, who are like the most unorthodox, um, will actually say that. And you got this guy Aga Khan would technically be the guy right now, Aga Khan the fifth, and he's a very well dressed guy. He's got good facial hair. So maybe any guy with good facial hair. I mean, the last guy didn't have facial hair, his dad. So I don't know, but the new guy does. So I find him more credible. But anyway, that's my bias. So no, like, bro, it's not kufr. They're not they're not kufar for rejecting the extension of Wati Rasul in the Hadith Hadir. And I did an Eid Hadir last year with the Shia. Maybe inshallah, the money for the tolls and stuff will go again. It's a lovely holiday. It's a little bit. It's better than Ashura. Ashura is kind of a bummer, you know. It's like the kid like slapping himself in the chest was I appreciated his energy, but and you have like maybe they get pizza or something, but it's a bummer, right? Ashura, there's Hussein, like it's like if Christians did Good Friday like real hardcore, some of them do, and then Easter they're gonna chill. But Hadith Gadir is Eid al Hadir, which is about a week after Eid al Adl in Dhul Hijjah month. It is very nice, light, hey, we're not Hanbalis kind of holiday. So anyway, so that's Shiism in a nutshell, is that you believe that this hadith had a more literal meaning, which is funny because it goes against like the literal hadith taking of the rest of Al Sunnah wal Jamaa. But anyway, all right, let's
Inward
finish up.
knowledge and this inward wisdom is the city of knowledge. And this is not to say in some superficial way that, again, we can easily, although many of the ulama have attempted to do this, rank them in fadl. My teachers are always skeptical of that. There are certain formulaic ways in which one can arrange them in descending order of merit from Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, and given the prophetic teachings you can see how that works. But essentially what we're looking at in the case of each of them is a particular type of greatness, and each one is so great that it's hard really to compare them. And this inward richness which has flowed out through the ulama of Sunni Islam down the centuries is something that comes specifically through the inward gate of the city of knowledge, which is the way of Imam Ali karramallahu wajhahu wa arda. And of course his fatwa is very important in the four canonical madhabs. And at this point, insha'Allah, we will have to end. One could speak about any of the four friends, the Jahariyar, indefinitely, but we've come to an end. But since we've mentioned Ali's role in fiqh and in the four madhabs, insha'Allah, in kana lana umr, if we have a long enough life and opportunity, the next lectures in this series, insha'Allah, it's our intention, will be about the four Imams, having done the four Khulafa. We'll do four, insha'Allah, about the four Imams, beginning with the Imam Ahl al-Madinah, Malik bin Anas, radiallahu anhu, passion for justice, and also a longing that the Ummah of Islam should be one and should be united.
Right. So what can we say about this? Can I go full? Can I do that? Okay, maybe I can give my Jerry Springer final thoughts. Um, yeah, I mean, the passion for justice and the unity of the human was definitely there. It wasn't achieved, and the idea that we then default to the hodgepodge of secular authorities that shoddily claim divine guidance and a specific a scholarly tradition is not. I don't think what Ali had in mind here, but this neo-traditionalist, and it's also traditionalist Sunni appreciation of Imam Ali and rationalization about his historical appointment as a wali, I don't believe is evil. I believe it is insufficient vitamins. And then I don't go to the other, by that same token, I don't go to the other extreme within Shiism of like, and you must follow the specific line of imams and maybe take some of their Gospel of John-esque theophatic hadith literally or even metaphorically. It's not necessarily something you need to deal with, just like you could be a good Christian and just follow the Gospel of Mark and Matthew or just the Gospel of Luke and probably get the script down. You're helping the poor and you're praying to God. And it's you might just make it. You're probably going to make it actually just with that. You don't need this extra stuff. Um, and then from a Mutazili point of view, this whole hope of a ongoing successorship. I actually had the radical idea about 4 weeks ago that actually Hussein appointed three people. He appointed Nas to his son. Logically, that's the mainstream Jafari, Ithna Ashari, Twelver, and Ismaili perspective of lineage. He appointed his cousin as well. He's like, you can also be an imam. You can see why this is not a popular theory among Shia. And then Zayd ultimately was like, okay, I need to like do a rebellion a bit later, and didn't go well. Then they tarnished his name with fake hadith books, and then his cousin Muhammad ibn al Hanafiya. He's a living male, and he's not in my party. He's not in this coterie. So I think his will was actually. I think he played this game because otherwise it's like did Hussein fail to do the Nas? Like this is important, like if this is like Wati Rasul ongoing, and then would that create chaos if you made more redundancy in a written document perhaps that you give one courier one document, you give another courier another document, and they go and say, hey buddy, like I think your mom material, keep up the deen, keep up the righteousness of the right path of the narrow path among the ummah. Um, and we got out of that what we will. So what we get out of the Haisani strain, if this were true, is maybe Hussein just forgot. He didn't appoint anybody. And then we just had to like guess, right? Um, their thing ultimately became the Abbasids. So Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiya's grandson, the successor to the teacher of Wasil ibn Ata, the founder of the Mutazili school before it became institutional, he decided, well, we're going to be Halifas. And he did the Abbasid revolution. So that was actually the revolution that did it. It just came a generation or so, or half a generation later than Zayd's failed revolution. And that revolution was necessary because the Umayyads were ruining Islam. And they were doing all the things the Muslims conquered and they take women. That was the Umayyads, bro. And they go, no, but look at this hadith. It explains 424, and this is like a satanic religion about abusing women because it's made up by men that just want to do things. And then you go, okay, what's the next verse? We'll put that hadith aside. What's the next verse? Oh, the next verse is about standardized rights, including receiving property, which presumably implies manumission to any slave marriage. Oh, okay. So they can't be zannies. They get the same. So there's the same restrictions. They have to have a mahr because they're enslaved. They're not in a position for overt consent. So there should be a sign off by their people. That's how the Crown puts it. Maybe that's their family. Maybe that's existing owner. This Maliki fic thing that no, actually this is like subordinated. So there's this preemptive right by the owner of access to the woman, and this is Mushan Zina, and it's in fic, and you have to just be a Daoth as the husband of a slave woman. No, mate, this is a buyout. This is you know, it could have been a little more explicit and said like the maher is the buyout or something like that, right? But to my legal reasoning, it implies manumission because a slave's property would just fall right through their fingertips. And that maher would just go to the master, but you're not buying, you're just sort of buying like a leasehold right to share the the woman that's your wife with this guy it's it's nuts. It is the abomination of Islam. And in Musnad Zaid, there's even worse stuff than you see in the Muwatta Malik about that. So, how does this happen? It happens with nifaq and shirk and the failure of people to do what is right, which is to, if necessarily, violently overthrow the corruptors of Islam. That's what the Abbasids did. That's what Zayd tried to do and failed. Sadly, that might have even gone better. But mashallah, and this is then rationalized inside the Sunni historiography. And okay, but it's okay. And then the Abbasids gave us like, and then they had the Mutazili, but we don't like the Mutazili. We like this hybrid Mutaziliya with Ahl Hadith, and that's Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Well, that's what it became, but it wasn't at the time. So does that mean if the majority of the Muslims were on board with the Mutazili Akida at the time, that they were the ones that the Hadith would be saying are good, and then by like shearing that off with the fitna caused by um, an alleged rebellion by Ahmad ibn Hanbal's people, which I'm not going to throw too much credence on, et cetera, et cetera. You know what I mean? You can kind of like, it's like I have a gun from God. Here's the gun. And now, oh, now I have the gun. Ah, gotcha. I don't think that's how God works. Do you? I think it's not about who has the gun from God. I think it's about one universal just principle that is eternal. MashaAllah, alhamdulillah. So, I want to thank God for guiding me to what is best in Islam, inshallah, or if not, then correct me for my mistakes and any mistakes that I've made in this video. And all respects to the beloved Sheikh, Tim Winter, and I think we'll all be poor when he's gone. And he represents the very best in Al Sunnah. He is an utmost scholar, an utmost Sufi and content creator and educator, and I very much value his creating this inspiring piece that has allowed me to make a double length response video. And this is my face. You'll be seeing it more. Inshallah, I'll be doing some interviews. And thanks for subscribing and liking the video. And please share it and get me some more subs. This is a perspective that does not get voiced clearly and specifically by basically anyone that I know. And I appreciate you helping me to reach more people. Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.